Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hobofinga podcast. My name is Crystal Cedino, and I am the Training and Development Manager for the Native Learning Center. I'm very thrilled that all of you are tuning in for another episode this week. So this one, I think, is going to be all episodes, I think, are helpful. However, I do think this one is going to be most helpful, especially for those that are looking for financing within brownfields and cleanups and so on and so forth. So today's topic, what we will be discussing, is a bird's eye overview of paying for assessment, cleanup, and redevelopment. So with us, we have a returning guest whom we love here at the Native Learning Center. But first off, we have Dr. Cynthia Annette, a research associate professor at KSU and a data mapping queen, who is also a Google Earth Outreach Network trainer. And then in addition to Cynthia, we have Eugene Goldfarb, an adjunct professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago, who retired after 30 years with HUD, quite incredible, and has been a longtime NLC instructor. And last but very not least, we have Mark Junker, who's the Tribal Response Coordinator for the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska, and who's also active in many national tribal and environmental initiatives. So hello, everyone, and welcome back.
Hello.
Wonderful. All right. So let's just kind of go ahead and jump in, because I know with the three of you, we've done a lot of discussions about brownfields. So for our listeners who maybe didn't have a chance to listen to those episodes, or they're getting through them and they just pop up on this one, remind us, what are brownfields? Like, what are we talking about here?
I'd like Mark to really tell us what brownfields are like in tribal country. But just in general, it's a stuck property. It's a property that either it's abandoned and nothing's happening, it's pulling down the rest of the neighborhood, or maybe it's not abandoned, but it's really the least desirable property in the neighborhood, and everyone wishes that somebody would fix it up. I don't know, Mark. Well, how do you view them in your tribe?
Well, brownfields are properties that people are not using up to capacity. There's something about the property that's not allowing it to be used to its maximum ability, and usually that's being caused by the contamination or perceived contamination on the site. And that could come in the form of pollutants, hazardous materials, chemicals. Um, and when you identify a brownfields, it doesn't necessarily have to come with the pollutants. We just have to recognize it as being a property that's not being used to its maximum ability.
And the thinking is that, oh, if we could only get an assessment done, magically that'll get the property moving. Or if we could only clean up, gee, they're building all the new stuff on the vacant land right next to the expressway at the highway interchanges. If we had a vacant piece of land, then they would come. And there's some truth to that, but there's also a lot of not truth to that.
So I was going to ask a little off script. I mean, is the whole point, behind this to make those properties usable or accessible to our tribal members, especially if they own the land? I mean, is that overall, the goal there?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I think a lot of our brownfields in the town of Reserve, which is a very small community, they've taken these homes that nobody wanted because they were in such poor condition. The tribe bought them, and now it's green space, and it's really improved the condition of the town. There used to be there is this theory out there called the broken window theory, which states that if you have a building in a particular neighborhood and no one's taking care of it, and someone goes through, throws a rock through a window, breaks it, and no one does anything about it, then the rest of that neighborhood will eventually begin to take on that look. And it's one of those theories that kind of drove a lot of the reasoning behind brownfields is let's clean up, these small sites so that they don't bleed into the rest of the neighborhood.
I think there's two moving forces for brownfield redevelopment. One of them is the neighborhood is local. It's like it's bringing down rest of the neighborhood. But the other one is just as important, and that's we're looking at the future and what do we want the future to look like? Do we want the future to look like a sprawling development where everyone drives and uses energy all over the place, nobody walks, and you're just getting in your car from one place to the other? Or do we want to have more compact development where people live in walkable neighborhoods, that they might be more social capital, more social interactions, less burning greenhouse gases, or energy in general? And it's both of those that we're trying to address, and why the government gets involved to try and promote brownfield redevelopment, because it's where we want to go.
Definitely.
And in a tribal context, our colleagues at the Indigenous Design and Planning Institute at the University of New Mexico like to ask a community, where is the center of your community? Where is the heart of your community? And if you can map that out and you can look at how the brownfields relate to that, you can see ways in which the community is fragmented. That the center of the community might be a historically important site, might be a culturally important site, maybe a place where people go for ceremonies, maybe a place where people go for fishing or gathering. That may be an emotional center to the place. It's not necessarily a physical center. And if that center isn't available to other community members, for example, one community that we worked with up in Alaska, the Gakona Native Village, had this horrible toxic dump in the middle of their community that was a legacy from before the village was centered there in the 1960s. And they struggled for decades to get that cleaned up. It literally cut them off from their traditional fishing sites and cut the community in half. So on one side was a river, on the other side was the highway, and in the middle was a toxic dump. And you couldn't walk from, say, your house to grandma's house, and you couldn't walk down to the fishing site. And having that toxic site in the heart of the village brought everything down. And now that they're able to clean it up, they're seeing a real restoration of the connectivity of that community. And so within many communities, but certainly in terms of our tribal communities, being able to identify where those problem properties are in relationship to where culturally important sites are can be a really important thing. So you might have a property that's not the most valuable economically, but it's the most valuable to clean up for the community to restore the proper functioning of that cultural context.
And for me, I think that's probably what's most important. I mean, like, I know economics, like, it is very important, for all that, but I definitely am more on the side of, community involvement and making things easier for the people that live there and more accessible. So that's great.
And that might be where the community needs to go in order to become more economically viable.
Right.
We don't often pay enough attention to the emotional state of a community. If they're very upset because they're cut off from each other and they're cut off from culturally significant sites, that may pull down their ability to thrive. Like Jen Clancy told us in a couple of episodes ago, looking at a community in terms of not just can people live, but can people thrive?
Right, definitely.
Yeah, and tribal communities are very interesting in that traditionally, and all these customs grew up when there was a walkable community. Everyone lived near each other. They saw each other every day. They walked to them. And in the last generation or two, everyone's gotten cars. They've moved far away. They don't see each other as much, and they're trying to maintain cultural identity, but with a different, a different reality.
Definitely, definitely. All right. So, what strategies has the government developed to promote, this redevelopment of these properties?
Let me lead off with that. I spent 30 years at HUD. What does HUD stand for? Housing and Urban Development. That when it came, there were all these cylinders at HUD. There's transportation, health and human services, defense. So urban development was supposed to be HUD, and that's where it was supposed to go. But right in the 70s, we started passing environmental laws, and everything is connected. It's a holographic universe. So when they passed CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and we discussed that in one of the early podcasts where we talk about liability, it really stopped lenders from lending money to redevelop, and that's how real estate development works in this country. People generally don't take their own money; they get some people who are investing, put it in the banks or pension funds, and they come up with the capital to build these things, hoping for a guaranteed rate of return over many years. So on these brownfield properties that might or may not be redeveloped, EPA jumped in and they said, we're going to do it. And the basic theory behind EPA, like HUD still has much, much, much more money for redevelopment, but EPA has strategic money that they feel there's a red zone. That what does it take to make it an equal fight? Like if we assess the property, if we clean it up, then maybe that's enough to get the somebody else's money to redevelop it, for someone else to invest in it.
Definitely. Awesome. Cynthia or Mark, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has popularized the Brownfields project within EPA, because sometimes EPA does become the redheaded stepchild, is that the Brownfields program itself really contributes, as where a lot of EPA programs don't see a financial advantage. The Brownfields program is the exact opposite, and it's bringing money into the communities. And for every dollar that the government spends, anywhere between $3 and $8 is brought back into the community.
Beautiful. All right. So why don't we talk about some challenges? Because I know with brownfields, we've discussed this in past episodes, but what unique challenges do tribal brownfields pose?
Maybe Mark could help us, but I think the main thing is that if you're in a city, you expect the private sector to come up with the money. Like you walk down a city, it's not a bunch of government buildings. I mean, there are places where there are government buildings, but it's mostly private sector who owns the real estate and who does the real estate development. Whereas in rural areas where most tribes are located, there's less economic activity. And even when there is private activity, they do different things. So if you're in a tribal area, you may have to be more creative where you're looking for who's going to redevelop this piece of land.
Yeah, another aspect of that
And
too
also,
is when you're going into business on the reservation, you become under the authority of the tribe. So it's no longer the state or the county. You're dealing now with the tribal government, and sometimes that's too much for a business to bite off.
Also, because of the unique history of the relationship between tribes and the federal government and the changing laws over time, many reservations have legacy federal facilities that have to be dealt with. We have reservations in the Great Plains that are cleaning up bombing ranges. We have a lot of abandoned federal facilities that need to be cleaned up that can give them special challenges, let's say.
Right. What? Sorry, and Cynthia, I'm not sure. just for clarification, what are bombing ranges?
There have been times in the past where the military has used Indian country for practice, and actually has dropped live ammunition in Indian country, and those areas need to be cleaned up. There is a terrible legacy from the Cold War on many reservations. I mean, one of the most famous, of course, is the uranium contamination on the Navajo reservation. But so they have large scale issues sometimes because of past military or national security issues. They may have large buildings that were used for federal facilities that they have to clean up. That can be a unique challenges because of the type of toxins or the scale of it, or because the previous owner was the federal government.
Definitely. Oh, wow, that's incredible. I had no idea. See, you learn something every day. Eugene, are you going to mention anything?
No, I was gonna amplify. It's not easy to do. Like there's a fort near me in northern suburbs of Chicago, Fort Sheridan, that was closed a few years ago, and they made this the open lands conservation group bought a piece, part of it that they cleaned it up, this walkway right on Lake Michigan, and public and everyone could use it, and if they opened it up, everyone was really happy, would go from all around just to walk there. And then somebody discovered an unexploded bomb, and it's been closed up for 2 years. This is after they supposedly cleaned it up. So it's not an easy thing to do.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. Those are definitely some unique challenges. So thank you for sharing
Let me
them.
mention another one. Like
Yeah.
it's in in the most of the country, like when somebody invests in real estate, they expect to get fee simple title to the property, and that's what they're used to doing. And if they go into a tribal area and they get a leasehold rather than fee simple, it's not that it can't be done. It's just that not as many people have done it, and they don't feel as comfortable working in that environment. So that's another thing that we add to it, another obstacle.
Wow. Oh, incredible. All right, so why don't we let's talk about strengths. Like what strengths are there?
I think one of the strengths would be having a 128A program that is listening for opportunities. I know my ears are kind of always tuned into to what's going on as far as opportunities that are arising. The biggest hurdle that I have is finding a match. We are very rural. We're 9 miles from two towns, and those towns they have all the basic things, and it's very difficult to get people from those towns to come out here. We can get them to come out occasionally for gas and cigarettes, and so that's kind of our main driver outside the casino economically. And so our big push right now is to move uh, our trading post from downtown Reserve up to the highway. And so now we're falling into the same trap Eugene and Cynthia talked about before. Is like, okay, now our community is less walkable. Not that that really ever was the center of town, but it is by default the center of town because that's where everybody has to go, at least once a week to fill up their tank. Now it's going to be moved out to the highway. The kids, we don't want them crossing the highway to get there, so we become less walkable.
But I think like what Mark's getting at is you do have buildings, you do have assets, you do have things going on. And the real question is, where do you want those? How do you want them to look? And do you have a strategy to get there? Like when you're building a new police station, when you're building a new community center, when you're building new housing, are you going to build it on an empty piece of land? Or are you going to say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to get rid of that slum and blight, that underperforming property that's bringing everything down. And you just so many times, like when the tribe gets funding, let's say to do housing, they're just thinking about the housing. They're not thinking about anything else. They're saying, oh, that's a nice field. Nothing's there now. Let's put the housing there. And forgetting that this is an opportunity to get rid of a non-performing property.
The other thing
and like
go ahead, Cynthia.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just say the other thing that tribes have as far as with their 128 programs, like we really don't have any big sites that need cleaned up. We don't have the blight that maybe some of the other tribes do, but we can use part of our 128A budgets to perform those cleanups. We also, have the opportunity to write into our work plans that we're going to explore, finance options for getting more money for cleanups. So those are all things that we can, be paid to work on. So the 128A program is extremely powerful.
And one of the things you can do too, to address what both Mark and Eugene said, is in previous episodes we've talked about prioritizing and coming up with strategies. And so if you're looking at where to put the housing, you might be looking at, do you have other opportunities for brownfield redevelopment that would make sense to put amenities for that housing? Would you change your prioritization to put in parks in certain places, to put in shopping centers in certain places, to put in the things that would support that housing? We've had discussions with tribes who have wound up in really unfortunate situations because the way in which the development got organized was that housing went in, the sewage treatment plant went in, and the dump went in because of siting issues, all next to each other. Each decision made sense, but some of the decisions don't make sense, and that's where a long-term plan and a strategy can really help.
All right, so let's talk about money. Who else has money for tribal brownfield redevelopment?
I'll leave that off. That there's lots of money out there, but it's not, number one, it's not always called brownfield money. Number two, it's often very competitive. That there's only, let's say there's 100 million out there, and there's 250 million that people want. So you have to stand out. And what makes you stand out is that number one, you're leveraging money, that you have some other money involved in there, that you're not expecting the EPA or HUD to pay for the whole project. And a lot of us are used to that. Let's say the HUD housing, that HUD will pay for everything. But certainly with the brownfields, if it helps you get EPA money, if you're working with other money, you're leveraging. And there's also tax credits if you have private partners involved and you have an old building. There's historic preservation tax credits. There's a lot of tribes have private partners, like to do a casino or to do tourism related actions. And if you could mobilize that to address your problem properties, you're killing two birds with one stone.
So if you have your inventory intact, you've got your priorities, you've got your plan, and you have a story for that property. So you can say, if we got money to clean this up, these are the things that can happen. These are the ways in which the ripple effect will work through our community. These are the benefits it will bring. And that will really help with leveraging. So if you've got a stuck property that is creating a problem, you want to be able to say, if this gets redeveloped, then we will bring in this many people, we will have this kind of activity, we will have this type of economic development. This will be the cultural ramifications of it, and to have that story worked out can really help with the proposal.
Yeah, I would say another aspect that the tribes need to develop is their patience, their persistence, and then their quickness. Be patient, because the financing aspect often runs on a calendar, and there's specific due dates. And so you're gonna have to, you want something done now, but you got to realize the money's not going to even be there. You're going to accept, bids or proposals until the 15th of June or whatever. And then it's going to seem like it waits forever. And then boom, when they act, they're going to give you the money and they expect it to be done right away. So, and be persistent. If you don't get it the first time, try somebody else or do it again next year. A lot of times it's almost automatic they don't fund you the first year. So be persistent. That's have other alternatives. Don't give up on an idea just because one person said no.
Right, like don't be discouraged.
Yeah, right, and in general, when dealing with grant panels, reviewers usually love it when you take their critiques seriously and address them. One common misperception is if you get turned down, then that's forever. Oftentimes, if you get turned down and you seriously address the concerns of the panel, you have a much higher probability of getting funded. And so it's always a good idea to get whatever feedback you can, to read it seriously, not take it personally. Oftentimes, you can rephrase it as, okay, I didn't communicate properly. They did not hear what I have to say. So I have to explain it differently. And then I'm going to tell them what the improvements in the proposal is. I'm going to tell them that I seriously considered this and this is how I'm addressing it. And that can really help your future success for grant proposals.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like our listeners to think of this as a dance, that it's not, there's a tendency in America to say, oh, the rugged individualists and some individual will see an economic opportunity here and they'll take their property and to turn it around. But this property has been stuck for 5 or 10 years where nothing, or maybe longer, where nothing's happened. And the only way we're going to turn around is if there's a dance, we could get everybody on the same page, the same dance, everybody doing their little bits, and together we'll mobilize all the resources. We'll have a positive view. If there's a private investor, they'll have confidence that the whole community is behind it and is going to make it work. If we're getting government money or maybe even a foundation money, they only want to give money where they'll have a good story to tell, where they'll have a newspaper release saying, look at this great project that we funded. They don't want to fund something that didn't go anywhere. So if we get this dance going where everyone has confidence that it is going to move towards fruition and have a decent project, then we'll succeed. But it's not an easy thing to do, and it takes time and effort.
Beautiful. All right. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of today's episode. Now, with that, I will allow Cynthia to do the plug for TAB because I do know that our listeners are going to be wondering where they can go to seek your guidance for the three of you. So yeah, go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, Tribal TAB is based at Kansas State University, but we have a wide range of collaborators and partners. We have many people throughout the country who work with tribes. We are free to any tribe, so please feel free to contact us. We will, if we don't have the expertise you need, we will find it. You can go to ksutab.org. That's ksutab.org. Go to the tribal tab, and that will take you to phone numbers where you can call. You can call our director, Scott. You can call our co-director, Nikki. They will get you in touch with any of us. We have quite a few resources on that website. We have our Brownfields inventory tool. We have something called Tab EZ, which will actually help you write the reports that you need for these grants. So there's a lot of resources there and a lot of people out there to help you. So don't feel alone. We've got lots of support, and all that support is free.
All right. Well, Thank you, you three, for being here today and discussing, the financing behind the redevelopment of brownfields. Definitely appreciate these episodes that we've done with you guys and gal. But with that, uh, thank you, listeners, for tuning in for another episode. And be sure to rate us and view our website for upcoming episodes and new releases. You can find this episode and many more on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google. And again, don't forget to visit the Native Learning Center website, so www.nativelearningcenter.com, to view all of the upcoming wonderful things that we have going on. But with that, enjoy your day, evening, breakfast, coffee, whatever or however you're listening to this episode. We truly appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next one. So for now, bye.